I found something this morning that I wasn't looking for. I was going through the shelf above the workbench in the shop, looking for a particular chisel I'd misplaced. And behind a coffee can of screws, I found a photograph. Small one, bent at the corner. Helen and me, standing outside the church in Bangor on the morning we got married. June the 14th, 1963. She's in a white dress that her mother made. I'm in a borrowed suit that was slightly too large in the shoulders. We're both squinting a little in the sun. We look terrified. We look happy. We look like two people who have absolutely no idea what they've just agreed to. I stood there in the shop for a long time, holding that photograph. The cold was coming in under the door the way it does in November, and I thought about that morning, about the priest saying the words, about Helen's hand in mine, small and cold from nerves, about my mother in the third pew, crying before we'd even started. I'm 82 years old. My name is Walter. Helen and I were married for 54 years before she died, 7 years ago this October. And today, because of that photograph, and because of the morning it gave me, I want to talk to you about marriage. What it actually is, what nobody told us when we started it, what I've learned from living inside it for 54 years and then living without it for 7 more. This is not a guide. I'm not qualified to write a guide. Helen was the one who understood people. I was the one who understood wood. What I have is one marriage looked at honestly from a long distance. And if you're married, or if you're thinking about it, or if you've lost what I've lost and you're trying to understand what it was, maybe what I've found will be worth something to you. Sit with me. The fire's going. The photograph is on the table beside my coffee cup. Here's what nobody told us. Nobody told us that the early years would be the hardest years. People talk about the early years of a marriage as the good years, the honeymoon years, the years before the weight of life settles in. And there's truth in that. There was a lightness in those early years that I can feel when I remember them, a kind of ease that came from being new to each other, from everything still having the quality of discovery. But the early years were also, for us, the hardest years in certain ways, and I don't think we were unusual in that. When Helen and I got married, I was 27 and she was 26. I had been on my own since my father died 4 years before. I'd been running my own household, taking care of my younger siblings, keeping the finances together, doing the cooking and the cleaning and the getting up in the night when somebody was sick. I was used to being the one in charge, used to things working the way I decided they would work. Helen had her own way of doing things, her mother's way mostly, the way she'd been raised. And her way was not my way. The way she organized a kitchen was not the way I would have organized a kitchen. The way she handled money was more generous than my way. The way she talked about problems, out loud, all the way through, processing by speaking, was very different from my way, which was to think about things alone until they resolved. We fought about small things in those first years, not terrible fights, but real ones, about the temperature in the house, about whether to save the money or spend it on the trip to Connecticut to see her sister, about whose family we'd spend which holiday with, about the way I left my boots by the door instead of putting them in the closet, about the way she'd start a story in the middle without giving me the beginning because she assumed I'd been paying the same attention to her life that she'd been paying to mine. I hadn't been. I was in the shop most of my waking hours. Nobody told us that the early years would require that kind of negotiation, that we'd have to take two people who had each been shaped by completely different households and somehow merge the households without losing either person in the merging. That it would take years, real years, not months, before the two ways of doing things became one way, our way. It took us, I think, about 7 years to stop fighting about the small things, to find a common temperature, to figure out the rhythm of the finances, to learn that when Helen started a story in the middle, She wasn't being careless about my attention. She was trusting it. She was assuming I was as interested in her life as she was in mine, and learning to match that assumption, to actually become as interested in her life as she was in mine, that was the work. That was the whole work. If you're in the early years of your marriage and it's harder than you thought it would be, that's not a sign that something is wrong. That's just what the early years are. You're building something. The building is hard before it's solid. Nobody told us that love is not one thing. It's several things that take turns. When I was young, I thought love was a feeling, a particular kind of warmth toward a particular person. You had it or you didn't. It stayed or it left. What I've found over 54 years is that love is more like weather than like a state. It changes. It has seasons. There are years when it's close to the surface, when Helen and I would look at each other across the kitchen and feel something warm and easy. And there were years, I've mentioned one, around 1985, when the love was buried under other things, under the work and the distance and the quiet drift that happens when two people stop tending the thing between them. In those years, the love didn't leave, but it changed into something less warm, something more like commitment, something more like a decision than a feeling. We stayed because we had decided to stay, because leaving would have been a kind of destruction we didn't want to enact, because the children were there, because we had a history that meant something, even in the lean years when it didn't feel like it meant as much as it once had. And then the lean years ended, the way seasons end, not dramatically, just gradually, the way the cold comes out of the ground in March. The warmth came back, different from the early warmth, deeper, more certain of itself. The love of two people who had been tested and had stayed and knew now that they would stay. Helen said something once, in her 60s, I think, after one of those evenings when we'd been talking at the kitchen table for a long time about nothing much and everything. She said, "Walter, I don't think people understand that a long marriage is several different marriages. We've been married 3 or 4 times, to each other." She was right. I think we had at least 4 marriages. The young and figuring it out marriage, the children and work marriage, the hardest years marriage, the one that almost didn't survive, and the last one, the one we had in her 60s and into her illness, which was, in many ways, the best one, the quietest and the most honest, the one where we'd stopped performing anything for each other, and were just 2 people in a house who knew each other completely and chose to be there. I'd give a great deal to have one more evening in that last marriage. I want to tell you something about those last years that I haven't said before, because I think it matters. When Helen got sick, the diagnosis came in the spring of 2015, and she died in October of 2017. Something happened between us that I didn't expect. I'd thought the illness would bring fear and grief and the practical difficulty of hospital visits and medications and the slow changes in how she moved and spoke. All of that came. But so did something else. We became, in those last 2.5 years, more honest with each other than we'd ever been. It was as if the illness removed a kind of politeness we'd been practicing for decades. The small social performance of a marriage, the things you don't say because there's always more time, the conversations you defer because there will be another evening, all of that fell away. Because there wouldn't always be another evening, and we both knew it. We talked about things we'd never talked about the hard year in 1985 and what it had actually felt like on both sides, about the children and the choices we'd made in raising them, and the ones we wished we'd made differently, about Helen's mother, who had died in 1994, and the grief Helen had carried about that relationship that she'd never fully put into words, about my father, who had died the year before we met, who I'd never spoken about to anyone the way I spoke about him to Helen in those last months. And we talked about small things too, things that had no urgency, no weight, but that we'd somehow never gotten to. Her favorite summer when she was 12, the dress she'd worn on our second date, which I'd never told her I still remembered, the name she'd almost given David before she settled on David, small things that had been waiting 30 years for a quiet evening with nowhere else to be. I am grateful for those conversations, more grateful than I can say. Some people don't get them. Some people are taken suddenly or taken in a way that doesn't leave time for the long, honest talking. Helen and I had 2.5 years of knowing what was coming, and we used them. We used them well. I'm glad we did. I want to be specific about the hardest year because I think it's the most useful thing I can tell you. In 1985, I was 41 years old. I was running 3 crews, taking on more work than was probably wise. I was drinking a beer or two too many in the evenings. I was distant from Helen in a way that I see now but couldn't see then. The way you can't see a thing you're inside of. The children were teenagers. The house was full of the complicated noise of a family with 2 teenagers and a man who was always half somewhere else. Helen had been trying to reach me for about a year, not dramatically, not with scenes or ultimatums, in her quiet way, coming to find me in the shop after supper, sitting at the table in the evenings and starting conversations I'd let trail off, suggesting we take a weekend somewhere, just the 2 of us. I'd say yes and then have a reason why the weekend didn't work. I was always going to do better next month, always going to slow down when the job settled. One Sunday afternoon in the fall of that year, Helen sat down across from me at the kitchen table, and she put her hands flat on the table and she said, "Walter, I need you to hear me." And something in her voice made me put the paper down, really down. I looked at her. She said, "I have been feeling alone in this marriage for about a year, maybe longer. I don't know if you know that. I'm telling you now. I can't keep going the way we've been going. I need to know if you want to be here." I didn't know what to say. My first instinct was to defend, to list the things I'd been doing, the jobs, the money, the roof over all our heads. To argue that I was there, that I'd never left, that she was misreading something. I didn't say any of it. Something kept me quiet. Maybe the look on her face, maybe the word alone. My wife, the woman who had been beside me for 22 years, feeling alone, in a house I'd built with my own hands. I couldn't argue with that. I said, "Tell me what you need from me." She told me, and then I sat with it. Not that afternoon. That afternoon I was still too stunned. But over the following days I sat with what she'd said, and I started doing some of it. Imperfectly, slowly. Coming home for supper instead of staying late. Sitting at the table after the children went to bed. Asking about her day and actually listening to the answer. It took a year, maybe 2, but the marriage came back from that conversation. It came back different, sturdier, more honest, with fewer assumptions on both sides. We'd said the hard things and survived the saying of them. And the surviving changed something, made the ground firmer under us. Nobody told us that would happen, that the fight you can barely survive can become the thing that makes the marriage solid, that the conversation you dread having, the one where the real thing gets said, is the conversation that saves you. We have, both of us, things we wish we'd said sooner, but what I'm grateful for is that we said them at all. Some people never do. Nobody told us that boredom in a marriage is not the enemy. The running from boredom is the enemy. There were ordinary years in our marriage that felt at the time like nothing. The long, flat years of the middle, the children growing up, the work continuing, the weekends following each other in the same pattern. Tuesday was fish. Sunday was the drive to her mother's. The same 4 friends over in the summer. The same holiday schedule. The same 2 chairs in the same room every evening. I chafed against this sometimes. Not out loud, but inside I'd feel something like restlessness. Like the ordinary was a sign that something was missing. Like a life shouldn't feel so predictable. I'd think about the men I knew who'd walked away from their marriages in their 40s, looking for something that felt less like Tuesday fish and more like the beginning of things. What I understand now is that I had it exactly backwards. The Tuesday fish was not the problem. The Tuesday fish was the point. The ordinariness was not a sign that the marriage was dying. It was the sign that the marriage was alive, that it had become the container you lived in, the structure that held your days together, the rhythm that made everything else possible. A marriage that has become ordinary is a marriage that has become a home. And a home is not boring. A home is one of the rarest and most valuable things a person can have. I didn't understand that when I was 40. I do now, at 82, sitting in this chair in the house I built with my own hands, in the kitchen where Helen cooked 10,000 meals, in the quiet that has been my companion for 7 years since she left it. The ordinariness was the wealth. I had it, and I didn't count it. Nobody told us that we'd each carry things we never told the other person. Helen knew me better than anyone I've ever met. After 54 years, she knew the interior of my life in a way that was almost frightening sometimes. She could read my mood from how I held my coffee cup. She knew which kind of silence meant I was working something through, and which kind meant I was unhappy and couldn't say why. She knew things about me that I hadn't known about myself until she named them. And yet, when she died, I found things I hadn't known. Not dramatic things, not secrets that would have changed anything, but private things. The green notebook with the gratitude list, her years of quiet noticing kept to herself. A box in the cedar chest with cards from people I didn't recognize, small kindnesses she'd been exchanging with people I never knew were part of her life. A few letters she'd kept from her mother, written in the years after we were married, in which her mother had expressed worries about things that had since resolved. A photograph of a young man I didn't recognize, labeled on the back in her handwriting with a name and a year, 1960, 3 years before we met, and nothing else. I don't know who he was. I never found out. It's possible it was nothing, a friend, a cousin. It's possible it was someone she'd loved before me, the way people love before they find the person they stay with. It's possible there was a whole interior history there that she kept private, the way all of us keep some things private, even from the people who know us best. What I felt, looking at that photograph, was not jealousy. It was something more like awe. She had been a whole person before she was my wife. She had been a whole person while she was my wife. She had an interior life that intersected with mine for 54 years and also existed independently of mine. She was not just my Helen. She was her own Helen. I think that's what I want to say about this. The person you are married to is not a character in your story. They are the main character in their own story, and you are one of the people in it. The fullness of who they are, the early morning person they were before you met them, the person they are when you're not in the room, the private fears and hopes and memories they carry that they've never put into words. You don't get all of it. Nobody gets all of it. That's not a failure. That's a person, a real, complete, irreducible person who chose to be beside you, who gave you more of themselves than they gave anyone else, and who still had parts that were only theirs. I fell in love with Helen again in those weeks after her death when I was going through her things, with the parts of her I hadn't known, with the evidence of her full and private personhood, with the green notebook and the box of cards and the photograph with no explanation. I wish I'd done that when she was still alive. I wish I'd thought to ask more often, not just about our life together, but about her life, the interior one, the one that was hers before mine and during mine, and that I never fully knew. And I want to say something specific about this, because I think it's something that couples lose track of in long marriages: the asking. When we were first married, I asked Helen things constantly. What do you think about this? What do you want to do? What are you feeling right now? Not out of strategy, just out of genuine hunger to know her. She was new to me. Everything about her was interesting. By the time we'd been married 20 years, I'd stopped asking as much. Not because I'd stopped caring, because I thought I knew. Because the person I'd been asking questions of since 1963 had become, in my mind, a known quantity. I knew what Helen thought about most things. I knew her opinions and her preferences and her way of seeing the world. What I didn't know, what the green notebook and the box of letters showed me, is that she had kept growing. She had kept changing in the interior way people change, adding rooms to themselves, developing opinions I hadn't heard her develop, loving people I hadn't known she was loving. She had kept becoming herself all those years, and I had stopped looking at some point because I thought I already knew who she was. If I could tell married couples one practical thing, just one, it would be this: keep asking. Even after 30 years, even after 50. Ask the person you know best what they're thinking about, what they're afraid of, what they've changed their mind about lately. They are not the same person they were when you met them. They have been building themselves all this time, the same way you have, in rooms you haven't visited yet. Ask to visit. When Helen died, I expected grief to feel like loss. And it did. Of course it did. The absence was so large and so immediate that it was almost physical. I'd reach for her, literally reach across the bed or turn to say something and find the empty space. And the empty space had a weight to it that I hadn't expected. But what I didn't expect, what nobody told me, was that grief would feel, in some parts of it, like love. Like the love continuing even though the person was gone. Like the love having nowhere to go and so filling the space where the person had been. When I thought about Helen in those first years, when a memory surfaced of her at the kitchen table or in the garden or in the hospital at the end, the feeling wasn't only sad. It was also warm. It was the warmth of 54 years of being known by someone. The warmth of a life made together, imperfectly, with difficulty, with long stretches of ordinary Tuesdays and one terrible hard year, and many, many evenings at the kitchen table. That warmth didn't leave when she did. It stayed. It's here now, 7 years later, in this chair, in this house she loved, in the green cup on the table. It's in the garden she planted, in the lupins I tend every spring because she tended them. It's in the conversations I have with Susan that are full of her. It's in the way David laughs, which is her laugh, which she gave him before she gave him to the world. Grief, I've come to understand, is love without a destination. It's the love continuing, looking for where to go. And over time, not quickly, not easily, but over time, it finds where to go. It goes into the tending, into the remembering, into the living of the life in a way that honors the person, into the telling of the stories so the person doesn't quite disappear. Helen is in everything I do now. That's not sad. That's the 54 years continuing. That's the marriage going on in a different form. Nobody told us that. Nobody told us that the point of a long marriage is not happiness. The point is depth. I've heard people talk about a happy marriage the way they talk about a warm house, as if the main criterion is comfort, as if what you're building, over decades, is a place where you'll always feel good. Helen and I were not always happy. We were sometimes unhappy, in the ordinary way people are unhappy, tired, frustrated, misunderstood, wrong about things, right in ways the other person couldn't see yet. There were years that were harder than they were happy. And if I'd been measuring the marriage by happiness, those years would have counted against it. But happiness was never what we were building. What we were building, I think, without knowing that's what we were doing, was depth. The particular depth that comes from knowing someone for decades, from having been through the hard years and the good years and the ordinary years and the years you barely remember because they were so quiet. From having watched each other age, from having been in the room for the things you can't unsee, the fear, the failure, the grace under pressure, the terrible joke nobody else found funny. From having said things you wish you hadn't said, and having been forgiven, and having forgiven. That depth is not happiness. It's something steadier than happiness, something you can't build quickly or manufacture or skip to. It has to be built slowly, over time, through all the ordinary Tuesdays and the hard Sundays and the long, quiet evenings when nothing much happens. Let me try to describe what depth felt like, because I don't think I've ever quite put it into words before. In the last years of Helen's life, after the diagnosis, in the 2.5 years we had together knowing what was coming, there were evenings when we sat by this fire without saying anything for a long time, an hour sometimes, just the fire and the two of us in our chairs and the house around us. And the silence was not empty. It was full. It was full of everything we'd been through together. It had weight and warmth to it, that silence. It was the silence of two people who had built something real and were sitting inside it. No young couple can have that silence. It has to be earned. It takes years and difficulty and staying. It takes 4 different marriages inside one marriage. It takes the fight in 1985 and the rebuilding that followed, and all the ordinary Tuesdays between. That silence is what I'd call depth, and that is what was worth building. Not happiness. Though happiness is good, happiness is welcome. I don't want to make it sound like happiness doesn't matter. But the depth outlasts the happiness. The depth is what you're still sitting in when the happiness has come and gone a dozen times. The depth is what holds you when nothing else does. I was 54 years in the building of it, and then she was gone, and I had the depth, all of it, and the person who'd helped me build it wasn't here to sit in it with me anymore. That's what I miss most. Not the happiness of the good years, the depth. The particular weight of being known by someone who had been building the knowing since 1963. Nobody told us it would feel like that. I'm telling you now. Nobody told us that a marriage is also how you make a person. I don't mean children, though children are part of it. I mean each other. I mean the way Helen made me, over 54 years, into something better than what I was when she found me. She made me more patient. Not completely patient. I still get short with things, still feel the temper start up when I'm tired, but more patient than I was. Slower to judge, slower to anger, more willing to let things be what they are instead of what I want them to be. She made me better at being wrong, at saying I was wrong, at not needing to be right more than I needed the other person to feel heard. That was a hard one. I was a proud man. I came from a line of proud men. She filed that down, gently, over decades, not by telling me to stop being proud, but by modeling something different. By being someone who could be wrong without it being catastrophic, who could say, I was wrong about that and keep moving. She made me better at beauty. I've talked about this before, the way she'd stop on a walk and point at something small, the lichen on the stone, the light on the water. She gave me an eye for it. I still have it. I see things now I would have walked past at 40, and I see them because she taught me to see. And I made her things too, I hope. She said I made her feel safe. She said, this was in her 60s, one of those late kitchen table conversations. She said that one of the things she had loved most about our marriage was that she had never once wondered if I would be there. That whatever else was uncertain, I was not uncertain. I was the thing she could count on the way she counted on the sun coming up. I held that when she said it. I hold it still. We were making each other for 54 years. That's what a long marriage is, a mutual making, a slow, daily, mostly invisible process of becoming the person the other person needs and needs to be needed by. I'm a better man at 82 than I would have been without her, considerably better. That's what the 54 years gave me. The shape I have now, whatever good is in it, was made by her hands as much as mine. Nobody told us that. The fire's gone down to a low, quiet glow. The photograph is still on the table beside my cup. That young man in the borrowed suit, squinting in the June sun. He has absolutely no idea what he's agreed to. And what he's agreed to is going to be the best and the hardest and the most formative thing he will ever do. I want to say one more thing to him, and to you if you're married, or if you've loved someone for a long time, or if you're just starting. It goes fast, impossibly fast. The 54 years were a long time, and also, looking back at them from this chair, they were a Tuesday afternoon. The children were small, and then they were gone. Helen was young, and then she was old, and then she was sick, and then she was gone. The house was full, and then it was quiet. What I have left is this, the depth, the knowing, the making she did to me, and the making I hope I did to her. The lupines in the garden, the green cup, the Thursday phone calls with Susan that are full of her mother, the way David laughs, and the photograph bent at the corner of two people who didn't know what they were getting into, who got into it anyway, who stayed. If you're married, or if you've been married, or if you're thinking about it, I hope some of what I've said today reaches you. Not the advice, because I haven't given you any. Just the true thing, said plainly, from the far end of a long marriage to the beginning or the middle of yours. It's worth it. The hard years are worth it. The ordinary Tuesdays are worth it. The conversation you've been afraid to have it. The person you've been meaning to look at more carefully, look. The depth doesn't build itself. You have to build it, day by day, with all the ordinary materials of an ordinary life. Build it, one ordinary Tuesday at a time, one hard conversation at a time, one evening at the kitchen table at a time. It is the most important thing you will ever build. If anything I said today reached you, you can subscribe to Walk With Me a while longer. I read every comment. Tell me about your marriage, or about the person you've loved longest. Tell me their name. I'd like to know. Take care of yourself. Sit at the table tonight. Turn off the television. Look at the person across from you. Ask them something you don't already know the answer to. Whatever they say, really listen. You have time tonight. Use it. The fire's still going. I'll see you next time.